The sun beat down mercilessly on Finnegan Finn. McAllister's cracked lips as he stared out at his barren land. The dusty expanse that had once been lush grazing fields now nothing more than a graveyard for his dreams. Montana Territory, 1876. A year that would either break him or remake him, though at this moment, breaking seemed the likelier outcome. Finn yanked his hat lower to shield his eyes from the relentless June sun. 3 months without proper rain had turned his promising cattle ranch outside Deadwood, Dakota Territory into a wasteland. The creek that had convinced him to stake his claim here 2 years ago had withered to a trickle barely sufficient for a single man, let alone a herd of thirsty cattle. "Damn you," he muttered to the cloudless sky, not sure if he was addressing God, fate, or merely his own foolishness. At 32, Finn had sunk every cent he'd earned from 10 years of driving cattle into this patch of earth. His father back in Missouri had warned him about the fickle nature of the frontier, but Finn had been stubborn, determined to build something of his own. The sound of an approaching wagon pulled his attention from his dying land. Finn squinted at the road, recognizing the weekly supply wagon from town. His heart sank further. He needed supplies, but his credit at the general store was already stretched thin. As the wagon drew closer, Finn realized it wasn't Harmon's usual delivery rig, but a smaller, unfamiliar wagon driven by a woman. Her face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but he could see chestnut hair escaping in wild tendrils around her shoulders. The wagon stopped several yards away, and the woman set the brake before jumping down with surprising agility. She approached with confident strides, and Finn found himself standing straighter despite his weariness. "Mr. McAllister," she called, her voice carrying across the distance. "That's me," he answered, pushing his hat back slightly. "Something I can help you with, madam." She came to a stop before him, and Finn was struck by the intensity of her green eyes, sharp and assessing as they took in his weathered appearance. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, but there was nothing girlish about her direct gaze. "I'm June Arbor," she said, extending a gloved hand. "I've purchased the Harmon place next to yours." Finn blinked in surprise as he shook her hand. The Harmon place had been abandoned for months after old Jim Harmon had given up and headed back east, defeated by the same drought that was now threatening Finn. "You bought that dried-up patch." The words slipped out before he could stop them. June's mouth tightened slightly. "I did. And I'm here because Mr. Douglas at the Mercantile said you might be interested in selling as well." Anger flashed through Finn. "Douglas should mind his own business. This land isn't for sale, even though your cattle are dying and your crops have failed." Her bluntness caught him off guard. "How do you? It's not hard to see," she said, gesturing around them. "The droughts hit everyone, but I didn't come to buy your land, Mr. McAllister. I came to offer help." Finn's pride bristled. "No disrespect, Miss Arbor, but what help could you possibly offer?" A smile played at her lips. "Water, Mr. McAllister. I know how to find water," Finn scoffed. "If you're selling dowsing or some other superstition, science, not superstition," she interrupted. "My father was a geologist who specialized in groundwater. I grew up learning to read the land." "And what does the land tell you about my failing ranch?" Finn asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "That there's water beneath it," she answered simply. "Deep but accessible, with the right knowledge and effort." Finn studied her, looking for signs of deception. Life on the frontier had taught him to be wary of false promises and snake oil salesmen, but there was something about June Arbor's direct gaze that made him hesitate to dismiss her outright. "Why would you help me?" he asked finally. She glanced toward her own newly acquired property. "Because I need neighbors who succeed, not fail, because isolation is dangerous out here." She paused. "And because I believe this land has potential, Mr. McAllister, your land and mine." Finn removed his hat, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Miss Arbor, I appreciate the offer, but I've already consulted with well diggers from town. They said the water table's too deep to reach with our equipment. They're right about conventional wells, but I know other methods." She turned, pointing to a formation of rocks near the base of a gentle slope on his property. "That's where we should start looking." Despite his skepticism, curiosity stirred in Finn. "And what would you want in return?" "Partnership," she said immediately. "I need help establishing my place." "Labor, protection, knowledge of the area. You help me, I help you." Finn laughed without humor. "You're proposing a business arrangement with a man who's one dry month away from losing everything." "I'm proposing a solution that benefits us both," she countered. "Unless you have a better idea." The question hung between them as Finn gazed at his parched land. The cattle he had left were growing thinner by the day, his reserves of feed were nearly depleted, and the small garden behind his cabin had withered weeks ago. "I don't," he admitted finally. "But I won't make promises I can't keep, Miss Arbor. If you can truly find water on this land, I'll help you however you need, but if you can't—" "I can," she said with quiet confidence. "Give me 3 days to prove it." Finn nodded slowly. 3 days, then." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" When June shook his hand, Finn noticed the strength in her grip and the calluses on her palm. Whatever else she might be, June Arbor was no stranger to hard work. "I'll return tomorrow morning with my equipment," she said. "Be prepared for hard labor, Mr. McAllister." As he watched her climb back onto her wagon and drive away, Finn wondered what madness had possessed him to agree to her proposal. Yet for the first time in months, he felt something dangerous stirring in his chest hope. The next morning dawned hot and clear, like every morning had for weeks. Finn was already awake and feeding his remaining livestock when he heard June's wagon approaching. She was punctual, he'd give her that. He watched as she expertly guided her team to a halt near his cabin. The wagon bed was loaded with tools, wooden crates, and several canvas-wrapped bundles. She wore practical clothing, a split-riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a man's work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was tightly braided and tucked beneath her hat. "Good morning, Mr. McAllister," she called, jumping down from the wagon. "Ready to find water?" "That remains to be seen," he replied, approaching the wagon. "What's all this?" "Tools of the trade." She began unloading equipment, handing him what looked like a surveyor's transit. "We'll start by mapping the land properly." For the next several hours, Finn followed June's instructions, helping her take measurements and mark locations across his property. She worked methodically, consulting a small notebook filled with diagrams and calculations. Occasionally, she would kneel to examine the soil or collect rock samples, which she studied intently before making additional notes. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Finn wiped sweat from his brow as they paused in the shade of his cabin's porch. "Here," he said, offering her a cup of water from his dwindling well. "It's not much, but it's cool," she accepted with a grateful nod. "Thank you. Your land has interesting features, Mr. McAllister." "Finn," he said, "if we're to be partners, might as well use my name." "Finn," she agreed, and he was surprised by how he liked the sound of his name on her lips. "And I'm June." "So, June," he said, gesturing to the marked stakes they had placed, "what have you learned about my interesting land?" "Several things." She pulled out her notebook. "You have limestone formations beneath the topsoil in the eastern section. That's significant because limestone can house underground channels and aquifers." She pointed toward the low ridge they had surveyed earlier. "And the way the rock layers are arranged there suggests a fault line beneath a natural path for water." Finn frowned. "I've walked this land for 2 years and never noticed anything special about those rocks." "That's because you were looking for what's visible, not what's hidden." She took another sip of water. "Tomorrow we'll start testing my theory." "And how do we do that?" "We dig, strategically." She smiled at his expression. "Don't worry, not with shovels alone. I have specialized equipment." After they finished their water, June led Finn back to the wagon where she unveiled what looked like a large metal cylinder with a pointed end. "This is an artesian drill," she explained. "My father designed it. It allows us to bore deep into the earth with less effort than traditional methods." Finn examined the device with interest. "I've never seen anything like it. Few have. It's not widely used yet." She ran her hand along the shaft. "The principle is simple. We create a narrow test hole to determine the depth of the water table before committing to a full well." They spent the remainder of the day preparing the drill and moving supplies to the site June had identified as most promising. By sunset, they were both exhausted but ready to begin drilling the following day. As they packed up the tools, June glanced at Finn's cabin. "I should head back to my property before dark." Finn hesitated. "It's a fair ride and you've worked hard today. I can offer you the cabin. I'll sleep in the barn." "That's not necessary," she began. "It's practical," he countered. "We start earlier if you're already here." After a moment's consideration, June nodded. "That makes sense, thank you." That evening, as Finn prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, he found himself studying June. She moved with purpose, helping him without being asked, comfortable in the rustic surroundings of his cabin. "You said your father was a geologist," he commented as they sat down to eat. "Is that how you learned about finding water?" June nodded, her expression softening. "He studied groundwater systems throughout the West. I accompanied him on expeditions since I was 12. She looked down at her plate. "After my mother died, it was just the two of us. And now, he passed 3 years ago, pneumonia." She said it matter-of-factly, but Finn caught the flicker of grief in her eyes. "I continued his work in Colorado, helping mining companies locate water sources." "That's unusual work for a woman," Finn observed. "Most worthwhile things are unusual until they become common," she replied with a slight smile. "What about you? What brought you to this particular patch of struggling earth?" Finn leaned back in his chair. "I spent 10 years driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, saved every penny to buy my own place." He glanced out the window at his land, silver in the moonlight. "When I first saw this valley 2 years ago, the creek was flowing, the grass was high, it seemed perfect. And then the drought came." "And kept coming," he agreed grimly. "If what you say is true, if there's water deep under this land." "There is," June said with conviction. "Then it would change everything," Finn finished. "Not just for my cattle, but for crops too. I've always wanted to grow something besides grass here." June studied him with interest. "What would you grow?" "Wheat, maybe. Fruit trees eventually," he shrugged, embarrassed by his own dreams. "Foolish notions for a cattle man, I suppose." "Not foolish," June said quietly. "Visionary." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Finn felt a connection that went beyond their business arrangement. There was understanding in June's gaze, a recognition of the dream that had driven him to stake his future on this land. The moment passed when June stood to clear the plates. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." As promised, the next day proved grueling. The artesian drill, while ingenious, required constant effort to operate. They took turns applying pressure and turning the mechanism, slowly boring into the earth. By mid-afternoon, they had created a test hole nearly 40 feet deep, but had yet to strike water. "We need to go deeper," June insisted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "My calculations suggest the water is at least 60 feet down at this location." Finn, muscles aching from the unfamiliar labor, nodded grimly. "Then we keep drilling." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the drill suddenly lurched downward several inches. June's eyes widened. "Pull it up," she commanded excitedly. They withdrew the drill, and as it emerged from the hole, water began to seep upwards, slowly at first, then with increasing vigor. "It's not much," Finn observed, watching the trickle filling the bottom of the hole. "It's a start," June countered, kneeling to examine the moisture. "And it confirms my theory. There's a confined aquifer beneath us." She looked up at him, her face flushed with triumph. "We've found your water, Finn." Despite his exhaustion, Finn felt a surge of elation. What next? Now we widen the hole and install proper casing. Then we drill even deeper to increase the flow. She straightened, dusting off her hands. "It will take time and effort, but this ranch won't die of thirst." That evening, their meal was celebratory despite its simplicity. June explained her plans for a full well system that could eventually irrigate portions of his land, transforming the failing cattle ranch into something more diverse and drought-resistant. As they sat on his porch watching the stars emerge, Finn found himself studying June's profile, admiring the determination written in every line of her face. "Why did you really come here?" he asked suddenly. "To this particular place, I mean." There's plenty of land for sale throughout the territory, much of it with better water access than what Harmon was selling. June was quiet for a long moment. My father and I surveyed this region 5 years ago. He was convinced there was significant groundwater beneath this valley, but no one was interested in his findings then. She turned to face Finn. When I heard about land for sale in this area, I knew it was an opportunity to prove his theories correct. So this is about your father's legacy. Partly, she admitted, but it's also about my future. I want to establish myself here, continue his work, but also create something of my own. Her eyes met his. Not unlike what you're trying to do. The understanding between them deepened. They were both chasing dreams that others might consider foolish, both willing to stake everything on their vision. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm of work that gradually transformed both their relationship and Finn's prospects. The test well became a proper shaft, and with June's guidance, they installed a pump system that began delivering a steady flow of cool, clean water. It wasn't enough yet to irrigate his entire property, but it was sufficient to save his remaining cattle and to begin planning for the future. Each evening, exhausted but satisfied, they would share meals and conversation on his porch, their initial wariness giving way to genuine respect and growing affection. June had moved into the small cabin on her own property, but spent most of her waking hours working alongside Finn. Together, they began surveying additional locations for wells that could eventually form part of an irrigation network. One evening, as they reviewed their progress, June spread out a map of their adjoining properties on Finn's table. If we connect these wells, she said, tracing a line with her finger, we could create a system that services both our lands. She looked up at him. It would require cooperation beyond our initial agreement. Finn studied the map and then her face. What exactly are you proposing? A formal partnership, she said. Your knowledge of ranching combined with my water management skills, we could create something neither of us could build alone. The suggestion made practical sense, yet Finn found himself hesitating. His feelings for June had grown complicated. The idea of a business partnership seemed simultaneously too much and not enough. It's something to consider, he said carefully. June's expression shifted subtly, and he wondered if she too was wrestling with emotions that went beyond their working relationship. The next day brought unexpected visitors. Finn was repairing a fence when he spotted 3 riders approaching from the direction of town. He recognized Walter Douglas, the mercantile owner, flanked by 2 men he didn't know. Finn set down his tools and walked to meet them, instinctively checking that his revolver was secure in its holster. The frontier bred caution, particularly when strangers appeared. McAllister, Douglas called as they drew near. Heard you've been making improvements. Word travels fast, Finn replied neutrally. Douglas dismounted, a heavy man with calculating eyes. Allow me to introduce Mr. Caleb Winters and Mr. James Morton. They represent the Dakota Mining Consortium. The men tipped their hats. Winters, the elder of the two, spoke up. Mr. Douglas informed us you've managed to locate water on your property despite the drought. What's your interest in my water? Finn asked bluntly. The consortium is expanding operations near Deadwood, Morton explained. Water access is essential for our processing facilities. We're prepared to make a generous offer for your land now that it's proven viable. Finn's jaw tightened. It's not for sale. Before you decide, Winters said smoothly, you should hear our offer. $5,000 more than triple what you paid, I believe. Despite himself, Finn was startled by the amount. It was indeed far more than his initial investment, enough to start over somewhere else with capital to spare. I appreciate the interest, he said after a moment, but I'm not looking to sell. Douglas frowned. Don't be hasty, McAllister. That's more money than you'll see in 10 years of ranching. Nevertheless, my answer is no. Winters exchanged glances with Morton before addressing Finn again. Perhaps we should discuss this with the other interested party as well, the Arbor woman. He smiled thinly. Our offer extends to her property too, of course. Something protective flared in Finn. Miss Arbor makes her own decisions, but you should know she's as committed to this land as I am. "We'll see," Morton said. "Women tend to be more practical about these matters." Finn was spared responding by June's arrival. She rode up on her bay mare, her expression guarded as she surveyed the gathering. "Gentlemen," she greeted them, dismounting, "what brings representatives of the Dakota Mining Consortium to our humble ranches?" Winters looked surprised at her recognition. "You know of us, Miss Arbor. I make it my business to know who's buying land in the territory," she replied. "And why?" The mining representatives repeated their offer, which June declined with the same firmness Finn had shown. When they finally departed with promises to remain open to further discussion, an uneasy silence fell between Finn and June. "They won't give up easily," she said, watching the dust cloud from the departing riders. "No," Finn agreed. "Men like that rarely do." He turned to her. "How did you know who they were?" June's expression hardened slightly. "Because they approached my father years ago about water rights in Colorado. When he refused to sell, there were incidents, vandalism, threats." She met Finn's gaze directly. "We should be vigilant." The warning proved prescient. 2 nights later, Finn was awakened by the frantic barking of his dog. Grabbing his rifle, he rushed outside to find the shed where they stored the drilling equipment engulfed in flames. "Fire!" he shouted, running toward the well. He began pumping water into a bucket, knowing even as he did that it was futile. The dry wood of the shed was burning too hot and fast to save. A movement at the edge of his property caught his eye, a rider disappearing into the darkness. Finn raised his rifle instinctively, then lowered it, realizing the figure was already out of effective range. By dawn, the shed was nothing but smoldering ruins. Most of June's specialized equipment had been destroyed, along with tools and supplies essential to their water project. When June arrived and surveyed the damage, her face went pale, then flushed with anger. "This is their answer to our refusal," she said, kicking through the ashes. "Destroy what we need most." "I'll ride to town, report this to the sheriff," Finn said grimly. June laughed without humor. "And what will Sheriff Davis do? The consortium pays half his salary." She knelt, salvaging a metal component from the ruins. "No, we need to protect ourselves and continue our work. This is just the beginning." She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, a series of accidents plagued their efforts. Fences were cut, allowing Finn's cattle to wander. A rock slide mysteriously blocked the road to June's property. Anonymous notes appeared, warning them to take the offer while it stands. Through it all, they persevered. June improvised replacements for her lost equipment. Finn reinforced his barn and established night patrols of his property. They made progress despite the interference, completing a second well and beginning work on an irrigation channel. Their shared adversity deepened their connection. One evening, as they repaired damage to the water pump, Finn found himself watching June's hands as she skillfully reassembled the mechanism. "You never cease to amaze me," he said quietly. She glanced up, a question in her eyes. "Most people would have given up by now," he explained. "Taken the money and found easier land." June's hands stilled on the pump. "Is that what you wish I'd done?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm grateful every day that you chose this valley." He hesitated, then added, "that you chose to help me." Something shifted in her expression. "It's not entirely altruistic, Finn. I need this to succeed as much as you do." "I know," he acknowledged. "But there's more to it than that, isn't there? Between us, I mean." The directness of his question seemed to catch her off guard. She stood, wiping her hands on a rag, her eyes not meeting his. "We have a good working partnership," she said carefully. "We do," he agreed, stepping closer. "But I think we both know it's become more than that." June finally looked up at him, vulnerability evident in her expression. Finn, whatever she intended to say, was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both turned to see a rider approaching at speed. Ethan Cooper, a young rancher from a neighboring property. "McAllister," Cooper called as he reined in. "Fire at the Arbor place looks deliberate." June was already running for her horse before Cooper finished speaking. Finn grabbed his rifle and followed, mounting his own horse in one fluid motion. They rode hard, reaching June's property to find her small barn ablaze. Several men from nearby ranches were already forming a bucket line from her well. fighting the spreading flames. June dismounted and rushed toward a corral where her horses were panicking, trying to escape the heat and smoke. Finn joined her, helping to lead the terrified animals to safety while others continued battling the fire. Despite their efforts, the barn was destroyed, along with the feed and equipment stored inside. As the flames finally died down, leaving only charred timbers and ash, June stood silent, her face streaked with soot and her expression grim. "Someone rode off that way," reported Sam Wilson, an elderly rancher who had arrived early on the scene. He pointed toward the hills. "Couldn't see who, but they were in a mighty hurry." "This has gone too far," Finn said, anger evident in every line of his body. "First my equipment, now your barn, they're escalating." June nodded, her voice steady despite the devastation surrounding them. "They want us isolated and vulnerable. They think if they destroy enough, we'll have no choice but to sell." The neighboring ranchers, having helped extinguish the fire, gathered around. Cooper voiced what many were thinking. "The consortium's behind this. They've been buying up water rights all through the territory one way or another. And bullying those who won't sell," added Wilson. "They did the same to my cousin over in Wyoming." Finn looked around at the assembled men. "This affects all of us. Today it's June's barn, tomorrow it could be any of your places." "What are you suggesting, McAllister?" asked Cooper. "That we stand together," Finn replied. "Patrol each other's properties, share information, make it clear that attacking one of us means dealing with all of us." The idea took hold. By nightfall, the ranchers had established a rotation for keeping watch over the valley's homesteads, with riders patrolling boundaries and a system of signals in case of trouble. June's cabin had survived the fire, but Finn insisted she stay at his place until additional security measures could be implemented. Too exhausted to argue, she agreed, taking his bed while he made do with a pallet in the main room. Late that night, unable to sleep, Finn found June sitting on his porch, staring out at the moonlit landscape. "You should rest," he said, joining her. "I keep seeing the flames," she admitted, wondering what they'll target next. Finn sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "We'll be ready." She turned to him, her expression vulnerable in the soft light. "What if this is a losing battle, Finn? What if they keep coming until there's nothing left? Then we rebuild," he said simply. "Again and again if necessary." "Why?" she asked, and he knew she was asking about more than just resistance to the consortium. "Because this land is worth fighting for," he said. Then, his voice softening, he added, "and because you're worth fighting alongside." In the silence that followed, something shifted between them. June's hand found his, fingers intertwining. "Before we were interrupted earlier," she said quietly, "I was going to say that, yes, this has become more than a partnership for me." Finn's heart quickened. "June, let me finish," she said. "I didn't come here looking for this, for you. I came for the land, for water, for my father's legacy." She met his eyes. "But now, when I think about the future of this place, I can't imagine it without you in it." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Finn reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I don't want to imagine it either," he said. When he kissed her, it felt inevitable, like the natural conclusion to the path they'd been walking since the day she arrived with promises of water beneath the parched earth. Her lips were soft against his, her hands strong as they moved to his shoulders. They separated after a long moment, both slightly breathless. June's smile was tentative but genuine. "This complicates our business arrangement," she murmured. Finn chuckled. "I think it was complicated already." She laughed softly, then grew serious again. "Whatever happens with the consortium, with the water, with all of it, I want you to know I'm here because I choose to be, because I believe in what we're building." "Together," Finn said. "Together," she agreed. The next week brought escalating tensions. Winters and Morton returned to renegotiate their offer, clearly surprised to find the local ranchers presenting a united front. When their increased monetary offer was again rejected, the threats became less veiled. "Accidents happen in mining country," Morton said as they departed. "Especially to those who don't understand the natural order of things." Finn and June continued their work despite the threats, focusing on completing a third well and expanding the irrigation channels. The neighboring ranchers, seeing the success of their water project, began discussing the possibility of a cooperative irrigation system that could benefit multiple properties. One afternoon, as June was mapping potential extensions to their water network, a rider approached from town. It was young Billy Jenkins, whose father ran the telegraph office in Deadwood. "Message for Miss Arbor," he announced, handing June an envelope. "Pa said it seemed important." June thanked him, opening the envelope with a puzzled expression that quickly transformed to shock as she read its contents. "What is it?" Finn asked, concerned by her sudden paleness. "It's from Denver," she said, her voice strained. "The mining consortium has filed suit against me, claiming I stole proprietary drilling designs from them in Colorado." She looked up at Finn. "They're demanding I cease all water-related activities and surrender my equipment for inspection." Finn took the telegram, reading it with growing anger. "This is harassment, pure and simple." "It's worse than that," June said. "This could tie me up in court for months, even years. They don't need to win, they just need to prevent us from continuing our work." "We need legal advice," Finn decided. "Judge Whitaker in Deadwood is fair-minded. He might be able to help." They rode into town the next day, the telegram and June's documentation of her father's designs secured in her saddlebag. Deadwood was bustling with its usual mix of miners, freighters, and fortune seekers. As they tied their horses outside the courthouse, Finn noticed Walter Douglas watching them from the doorway of his mercantile. Judge Whitaker, a stern man with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for impartiality, listened carefully to their situation. "The consortium has considerable influence," he warned after reviewing the telegram, "but their claim appears spurious. These designs you've shown me are clearly your father's work, predating their alleged proprietary system." "What can we do?" June asked. "File a counterclaim," the judge advised. "I'll help draft it and document everything, every threat, every accident, every interaction. Build a case showing pattern and intent." He fixed them with a serious look. "But understand, legal battles are costly and time-consuming. They know this." "It's likely their strategy." As they left the courthouse, Finn felt June's determination faltering for the first time. "We can fight this," he assured her, taking her hand. "At what cost?" she asked quietly. "Every day we spend fighting legal battles is a day we're not improving our land, not securing our future." Before Finn could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. People were shouting and pointing toward the hills beyond town. A column of smoke was rising in the direction of their properties. "Fire!" someone yelled. "Fire in the valley!" They raced for their horses, fear propelling them faster than caution warranted. As they galloped out of town, other riders joined them, ranchers, townspeople, even a few miners concerned about their neighbors' plight. The smoke led them not to either of their properties but to the Cooper place, where flames had engulfed the main house. The family had escaped but were watching helplessly as their home burned. "It was deliberate," Ethan Cooper told them, his face streaked with ash and fury. "Two riders. They shot at us when we tried to stop them, then lit the place up and rode toward the hills." A group of men led by Sam Wilson had already organized a pursuit party. Finn moved to join them, but June caught his arm. "Wait," she said, her eyes wide with sudden realization. "This could be a diversion." "What do you mean? Everyone's here," she said urgently. "Our properties are unguarded." Understanding dawned on Finn's face. They remounted immediately, racing back toward their adjacent ranches, accompanied by several others who had grasped the potential strategy. They split up as they neared the valley, half heading for June's property, half for Finn's. As Finn crested the rise overlooking his land, his worst fears were confirmed. 3 men were at his newest well, working systematically to dismantle and destroy the pump mechanism. Finn drew his rifle, calling out a warning. The saboteurs looked up, spotted the approaching riders, and scrambled for their horses. Gunfire erupted as one of the men fired wildly toward Finn's group. The ensuing skirmish was brief but violent. One of the saboteurs was wounded, another captured when his horse stumbled in the rocky terrain. The third escaped into the hills. The captured man, sullen and tight-lipped, eventually admitted under questioning that he had been hired by the consortium's representatives to discourage Finn and June from continuing their water projects. "They said no one gets hurt if you just take the money and leave," he muttered. Said it wasn't personal, just business. At June's property, a similar scene had played out. Her newest irrigation channel had been partially destroyed, and attempts had been made to contaminate her well with coal oil. The saboteurs there had escaped, but their intention had been clear: to render the water projects unusable and force abandonment of the properties. That evening, the ranchers gathered at Finn's cabin to discuss their response. The mood was grim but resolute. "This has gone beyond threats," Cooper said, his family now homeless because of the consortium's tactics. "They're willing to burn us out, maybe worse." "We take this to the territorial authorities," suggested Wilson. "With a captured saboteur and his confession, they can't ignore it." "The territorial governor is heavily invested in mining interests," June pointed out. "We need more than one man's word." Finn had been quiet, thinking. Now he spoke up. "We need to expose them publicly, make their tactics known beyond our valley." "How?" several voices asked. "The Black Hills Pioneer," Finn said, referring to Deadwood's newspaper. "And every other paper in the territory. June's water-finding methods are newsworthy on their own. Ad in corporate sabotage and attempted destruction of a vital resource during drought conditions." "A public fight," June said, understanding dawning. "Make it too visible for them to continue operating in shadows." The strategy took shape. June would document her water-finding techniques and the success of their irrigation projects. Cooper would testify about the destruction of his home. The captured saboteur's confession would be recorded by Judge Whitaker. Together, it would form a compelling story of innovation, perseverance, and corporate malfeasance. As the meeting broke up, Finn and June found themselves alone in his cabin. The events of the day had left them exhausted but united in purpose. "This won't be easy," June said, leaning against him as they sat before the fire. "They have resources we can't match, but we have something they don't," Finn replied, his arm around her shoulders. "What's that?" "A reason to fight that goes beyond money." He turned to face her fully. "June, whatever happens with the consortium, with the water, with all of it, I want you to know that finding you was the real miracle, not finding water." Her eyes softened. "Finn McAllister, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you," he answered simply. "And that I want to build this future with you, not just as partners, but as husband and wife." June's smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, I want that future, together." Their kiss was a promise, a commitment to each other and to the land they were fighting to transform. The next weeks brought both challenges and unexpected support. The Black Hills Pioneer ran their story on the front page, portraying June as a pioneering scientist bringing vital water knowledge to the drought-stricken territory. Other newspapers picked up the tale, particularly the angle of corporate bullying of small landowners. The publicity had immediate effects. The consortium's representatives found themselves unwelcome in Deadwood, confronted by angry citizens whenever they appeared. Their legal case against June was scrutinized by journalists, who quickly identified its frivolous nature. Perhaps most significantly, other ranchers and farmers throughout the region began contacting June, seeking her expertise in locating water on their properties. What had begun as a personal battle for survival was transforming into a movement to change how water was accessed and managed throughout the territory. The territorial governor, pressured by public opinion, ordered an investigation into the consortium's activities. Evidence of bribery, intimidation, and property destruction accumulated, leading to indictments against several company officials, including Winters and Morton. By late summer, when the first rains in months finally came to the valley, Finn and June stood on his porch watching the precious water soak into their land. The immediate threat from the consortium had receded, though both knew the larger battle for water rights in the West was far from over. "We did it," June said, leaning against Finn's shoulder as they watched the rain. We found the water, we saved the land, we fought them off. We're just beginning, Finn replied, his arm around her waist. There's so much more to build. The wedding took place in October, after the first successful harvest from their newly irrigated fields. The entire community gathered to celebrate not just their union, but the resilience they had shown together. Judge Whitaker performed the ceremony in the meadow between their two properties, symbolic of the joining of their lands and lives. June wore her mother's lace-trimmed dress, restored by the women of Deadwood, with wildflowers in her hair. Finn, uncharacteristically clean-shaven, wore the only suit he owned, purchased years ago for his father's funeral. "Do you, Finnegan McAllister, take June Arbor to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Judge Whitaker asked. "I do," Finn answered, his eyes never leaving June's face. "And do you, June Arbor, take Finnegan McAllister to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said clearly, squeezing Finn's hands. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the Dakota Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was met with cheers and applause from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, June whispered to Finn, "From drought to abundance, who would have believed it?" "I would," he replied. "From the moment you arrived and promised me water." In the years that followed, Finn and June's vision for their land expanded beyond their initial dreams. The irrigation system they pioneered became a model for the territory, with June publishing papers on her groundwater location methods that gained recognition throughout the West. Finn's ranch diversified as he had hoped, adding crops and orchards to the cattle operation. By the time their first child, a son they named Robert, after June's father, was born in 1878, the McAllister Arbor Ranch had become one of the most productive in the region. 2 years later, twins Emily and Sarah joined the family, filling their expanded cabin with laughter and energy. June continued her water surveys, often with the children in tow, teaching them to read the land as her father had taught her. The Dakota Mining Consortium eventually dissolved following the scandal and legal proceedings, its assets acquired by more reputable operations. Walter Douglas, implicated in the conspiracy, sold his mercantile and left the territory, replaced by a merchant more supportive of local interests. In 1881, 5 years after June first arrived with her promise of hidden water, she and Finn hosted a gathering to celebrate the completion of a cooperative irrigation network that served 6 adjacent properties. Standing before their friends and neighbors, many of whom had fought alongside them against the consortium, Finn raised a glass of clear, sweet water from their deepest well. "To the lifeblood of our land," he toasted, "and to the woman who taught us to find it." June, holding their youngest child, blushed at the attention but stood proudly beside her husband. "The water was always there," she responded, waiting for those with the courage to seek it. As the evening progressed, Finn found June standing alone near the ridge where they had drilled their first well, now the center of a thriving operation. "Contemplating your handiwork," he asked, coming up beside her. "Contemplating how differently things might have turned out," she replied. "If I hadn't been so stubborn about proving my father right, if you hadn't been so determined to save your land. If we hadn't found each other," Finn added, taking her hand. June smiled up at him. "That's the real miracle, isn't it? Not the water, but us." "Water and love," Finn mused. "The two things no one can live without." As twilight settled over their flourishing land, they walked hand in hand toward home, where their children waited. The drought that had once threatened everything Finn valued had become the catalyst for a life richer than he had ever imagined, one built on the twin foundations of water hidden deep beneath the earth, and love discovered when he least expected it. Behind them, the wells they had fought so hard to create continued their steady work, drawing life-giving water up from the depths, transforming what had once been failing land into a legacy that would sustain generations to come.